Hello and welcome to Freedom from Fear, a German New Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Ashlee Newberry.
And I'm your other host, Abigail Puccioni. Please be aware that nothing discussed here on this podcast should be taken as medical advice.
Consult your trusted professionals and your own inner knowing before making any health decisions.
Hello, and welcome back to this episode of Freedom from Fear. We're super excited to be covering a really big topic today, which is the KCT program. It stands for Kidney Collecting Tubules, which we will dive into in just a minute. But we're really thrilled to welcome our special guest, Nellie Barnett.
Hi. Nellie is a dedicated mother of two and an expert in German New Medicine. With nearly 9 years of study under numerous GNM teachers, she is the founder of New Earth Wellness, where she integrates various modalities within the framework of German New Medicine. Nellie specializes in chronic pain, mental health, and women's health. Based in Western Australia, she is committed to making GNM accessible to all and transforming the wellness paradigm. Welcome.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, we really appreciate you being here, and we're excited to dive into the KCT topic, which I know we get a lot of questions about, and I'm sure you do as well. And so, yeah, why don't you just start by giving us a little information on what we're talking about when we say KCT and, kidney collecting tubules, for people that might not be aware of what that is or what that means, and why it's such an important topic in German New Medicine and GNM. And why it's relevant to so many people.
Yeah, for sure. So, KCT, Kidney Collecting Tubules, is the expansion of that. And this is one of our most primal survival-based programs. So it is something that I see. In fact, I haven't seen a CT yet that doesn't have KCT running, a CT scan that's been read through the GNM lens. I think that's true. It'd be very, very close if it was not. You're right. So, and I have this running myself. I've had my own brain scan done, and I know that I'm running KCT. So the kidney collecting tubules are responsible for our, part of our water processing that goes into urine. So there are 6 tubules across the kidneys, 3 on each. And basically, this is for those of you who are familiar with GNM, this is a brainstem endoderm program. So the brainstem programs are definitely our oldest, most primal survival-based programs. These are often about morsels, and in the case of the kidney collecting tubules, we've got the water morsel being the most vital thing to our survival. And so at its core, I see the KCT program as our most survival, most survival program. And so basically the conflicts linked to this one are you'll see in a lot of more publicly available GNM, you'll see it described as abandonment, existence, isolation, and refugee. But really, we've just been speaking about this before this chat, that this kind of comes down to the 2 predominantly. So we've got the abandonment and the refugee, and all of kind of existence and isolation and all the different themes are kind of captured within them. And I personally would even break that down further to, that real survival. This really comes down to our survival. And if we think about humans being pack animals, tribe animals, our survival is often so based on resources, which is this refugee, and our place within that tribe, within that pack, linked to our survival, and this is the abandonment. So it's like if I'm all on my own, if I don't have the resources, then the thing I need most to survive is water and what's within that water. So we spoke about the abandonment being predominantly about that water retention, and then the refugee is more that resource-based topic where the storage is actually around urea and creatine, right? Because this has things to do with protein. It comes from the protein processing, and therefore it's almost like recycling the morsel that's going to help us survive as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, with this brainstem endoderm program, while the conflict is active, we see a proliferation of cells, and that basically increases the filtration system of these collecting tubules. It swells them. So if you can imagine like a tube that's gaining cells, then it's going to take longer for that water to be processed through this tube and through this filtration system. So there's water storage and we get more out of the water, right? It's like the filtration system is optimized because it has to go through slower and it's got more surface area and it takes more out. And so we can have anywhere from one of these tubes to all of these tubes affected, depending on the severity and the conflict load and if we've got one or both sides activated. So yeah, it's really it's to me, it's the like I said, the most survival program we can have running, and it's linked to our core most survival needs. So the abandonment and existence and isolation is really about like, I'm out of the tribe, I'm out of the pack, I'm on my own. I've heard it described like I'm a fish out of water. If we go right back to our, very primordial beginnings, and GNM does have the view that we originally came from the sea. And there are things within the body that seem to support that, tears and blood. Saline content is the same as the ocean. And there's lots of, indicators that has substance to it. So I feel like a fish out of water. It's like I've been flipped out of my sea, out of my tank, flipped out of my tea.
The tea.
Out of my out of the sea and out of my tank. And I don't know where I am anymore. I'm out of my normal environment. I don't have the resources. I don't have the tribe. And then Abigail, you mentioned like hearing in a recent GNM conference that you were at, that you heard it described like a soul without a mother as well, which is a really beautiful rendition of it. And that definitely makes sense to me. And I'll talk more about that later, about my personal experience. The other way I've heard it described that really deeply hit a chord with me was the feeling of there's no one there to catch me if I fall.
No. Yeah.
And that really struck me as well. The other thing to keep in mind is this is going to be a slightly different expression for a male and a female, to a biological male and female. So the female bases her value and her worth and her life on connections and community. And so often this is very much community linked for a woman, whereas for the man, it seems to be more linked to resources. And also this feeling like if you go back and back and back, it's like I've had it described to me from a GNM mentor, like imagine the men were out hunting together and something happened and like all the other men ran away and left one guy there, and he was like, whoa, wait, like where have my hunting partners gone? Like I'm left all alone in this dangerous situation and everyone's run off and left me. Yeah, and that's the kind of sense that a male tends to experience it in as well. So it's slightly different. So yeah, that's kind of the crux of the KCT program. Obviously, therefore, the thing that this results in most is during conflict activity, due to that water retention, we experience quite extreme, or can be quite extreme in some cases, weight gain. And water is a lot heavier than fat itself, and it can come on a lot quicker. Like it's actually just not possible to gain fat weight as quick as a lot of water weight comes on. So a lot of people will think that it's fat weight, but actually we're looking at water weight, and it takes a much longer time to build that fat weight in reality. So yeah, that's the crux of the KCT program. Was there anything I missed there, or anything you guys would like to expand on?
No, I mean, I think that was a great overview, fantastic explanation. You hit all the important points with KCT and the two kind of unique flavors of that. Maybe if you want to give an example, just for listeners to kind of have, an idea in their heads of what this might look like. Someone that's running KCT with more the abandonment flavor versus someone that's running it with more that refugee flavor. How might that look different in those two people?
Yeah. So something that people often find surprising, actually, and even myself when I discovered this, but with the refugee flavor, there can be a tendency actually not to put on weight. So we can go the other way. It can be that this is the urea and creatine that is stored, and instead of water weight, they actually present as quite slim individuals. Now that's not a be all end all. Sometimes it can, sway either which way, but that's the tendency. And in extreme cases, then this would be the person that ends up on dialysis, right?
Right.
So they're basically storing those protein morsels within the water. And then the abandonment definitely tends to be the weight storage. So I myself have this one running, like I said. So I have weight that just won't budge, doesn't matter what I do. Baggy eyes, like the bags under the eyes is often quite a telltale sign as well. That can be a presentation. In the healing phase, or if we've got a hanging healing or a relapsing conflict, then we can get those kidney stones as well. It can be pretty uncomfortable. So they're the main, presentations of the KCT. Just like swelling, and even like exaggerated swelling when another program is running, and we'll come to this with the syndrome. But exaggerated swellings, and just that water weight, not urinating as much as we intake. So you can actually do a measure there as well. You can, for anyone home, like you can measure the intake of water, your output of urine, and if there's a significant difference in those, then the chances are that you're storing it, right? Under 1 liter expellation of urination per day is both kidneys affected. 1 to 2 liters is one kidney affected. That's the general rule. But obviously the CT scan is your best way of, clarifying and validating that.
So if you're peeing more, only one kidney is affected, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay. I was like a little bit confused.
Yeah. So if you're peeing between 1 to 2 liters, then it's one kidney. Under 1 liter is both kidneys affected.
Yeah.
As a general
So if anyone wants to measure their pee, go right ahead.
And I know that also with the refugee flavor, where the urea and creatinine is being retained, that some symptoms with that you might not get the profuse urine output as you would in the healing phase of the more abandonment flavor KCT. But with the refugee flavor, you might have like some foamy urine. It's more likely to smell bad, like more like that TB smell, apparently. And then also what was the other thing? You don't have like the same volume of urine output with that,
because you don't have as much hold on to in the first
retention.
place than you do with the abandonment.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
So my understanding is that the frothy, so in healing phase, so mostly we've spoken about conflict active phase, but in healing phase, yes. My understanding is that with both flavors, I'd actually like that expression of it, with both flavors of the conflict, there will be the foamy urine, and that's from the protein, and the smell, which is the tubercular. So anything with tubercular breakdown, TB breakdown, which is related, this is the microbe that's related to the brainstem endoderm programs, particularly. So there'll be that smell, but exaggerated, exacerbated in the context of the refugee. But my understanding is still both. But perhaps it's more in the refugee.
Well, I think it would be more in the refugee because there's not as much urine to like spread out what you're getting out.
It'd be more, yes, it would be more
condensed. Be more concentrated. Yeah.
But also it's very common for people to be running both of these at the same time. So of course you're not just going to have maybe like one or the other set of symptoms. It's probably going to be, I would venture to say that for most people, it's a combination.
Yeah, could be. I don't know. I don't know. I could possibly, but I don't know. I could put a stamp on that one, to be honest. I don't believe mine is. Like mine is like quite clearly the abandonment flavor. Could be. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see the CTs and to see like the matchup of symptoms, but yeah, I do think that the abandonment flavor is the classic water retention, flavor that's going to be the most, I guess, obvious to kind of pick out. And obviously, it's very, you know, it's easy to see when someone's retaining water and then noticing the urine output, and when they're having swelling, in their ankles or their hands. There's more noticeable symptoms during the active conflict, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Although you'll know when you hit healing phase of the
Well, yeah.
the long running program, you'll definitely know, because you will be urinating like considerably more
constantly and getting up in the night and possibly night sweats.
Yeah.
Those are fun.
Yeah. And you've been having this recently, Ash?
Yeah. I've had a lot of resolution, especially in the last few months. And I've sweat so much a couple times that I've had to like change my sheets. Like the next day, like sweat through my pajamas and like through the sheets. Like it was like very obvious, and I was like, oh, okay, this is definitely some night sweats.
Yeah.
And I live in Texas, but I keep my AC on like all the time, and especially in the summer. And so like my apartment's pretty cool. It's like 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't know what that would be in Celsius, but not super hot.
It sounds hot just because the number's like way bigger.
I know. I was like, oh, it'd probably be like 20 something in Celsius. I don't remember math. But so it can be obvious, but then sometimes it's been a little bit less, where like the sweating is not as intense, but it's like I'm still in a healing and I'm not peeing as much. But one example that I would like to share now, just because we're in it, is something that happened to me. I did a KCT workshop back in May that I hosted, and like 2 weeks before the workshop, I had something happen with a couple friends. It was like a very like non-issue, but like apparently I interpreted it as feeling abandoned. And I was texting with a couple close friends, trying to set up some times in the next few weeks to get together, like to go to some events together, to hang out, whatever. And there's so many things going on in Austin. Like they had other plans, and so they couldn't join me. And so there was that piece, but then there was also this piece of, then I wasn't invited to what they were doing. And so it's kind of like both. And I didn't really think much of it until the next morning. And I've been doing a nutrition and weight training program. So I'm taking my weight every day in the morning. And I went up by 2.2 pounds, and I'd been like declining, or like not declining, decreasing my weight because I was in like a focus phase. And I was so swollen. I could barely bend my fingers, and my shoes didn't fit because my feet were so swollen. Like I had to wear other shoes to go on my morning walk. And I was like, what is this? So I just thought to like the previous day, and like the texting thing, like in the grand scheme of things, right? Like it's such a small thing, but because I've been primed for this conflict and unconsciously used a lot of situations and relationships to abandon myself or feel abandoned, I've used these as opportunities, right? And so what's hilarious is that I resolved it pretty quickly. Like I resolved it that day and like basically peed it all out. But the funny thing is that in that moment, it didn't feel that significant, but to my body and to my psyche, like it was. And so that's what's interesting about resolving these, and especially on those more subtle levels. It's like, how are you in your life setting yourself up to just use many moments as opportunities to either feel abandoned or feel like a refugee? And you're not, obviously no one's doing it consciously, but it's like changing that perception to set yourself up for success. And that also, if you trigger it again, it's okay. But that 2.2 pounds is 1 liter of fluid. So what Nellie was just saying about how much you're peeing out during the day, and that water is a lot heavier, right? And that to fluctuate that much from one day to the next, it's definitely water related. And so like it's been very fascinating taking my weight every day to notice those fluctuations, and to see it so clearly. And then with the hands being super swollen and the feet having to wear different shoes that are a little bit bigger, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting.
Yeah,
and
this kind of tells us this is a track for you. Just
yeah,
for those listening, like this isn't necessarily because I think sometimes people get confused of like, oh, this is the conflict that's setting off the program, but there needs to be like a conflict is not going to present that instantly at an actual DHS, because there needs to be time for the adaptations to happen, right? So what we're talking about is basically a track or something that has like exaggerated an already running program for Ashlee here. I just wanted to drop that bit in.
Thank you for that.
Sorry if I jumped in. You were going to say anything else there, Ash?
No, I don't think so. I just think for anyone listening to just be aware that, if you have KCT or any other symptom, like it might be a lot more subtle that it's being retriggered, or you might have tracks that aren't as obvious. So paying more attention to, what's going on in your mind and how you're interpreting things, and then paying attention to the symptoms. Like even if I wasn't weighing myself every day, I would have noticed the hands and the feet because it was very obvious. And that I had to wear different shoes, which was crazy. So, just that it doesn't have to be this huge thing that happens. I mean, like, even if the original DHS was a big trauma or like something that was, more obvious, the tracks that you might have now can be really subtle. And so there's probably more detective work to be done, because I know we had a lot of questions come in about, well, I've done everything to try to resolve this, but like, it's still there. And it's like, well, there's just probably more layers there. So,
layers. And it's often so unconscious. Like I've been working on my own KCT with, my goodness, I must have worked with probably close to a dozen other GNM consultants now, and they've all had like different perspectives on what it might be. And the most recent one I've just had a meeting in the last week actually really makes a lot of sense to me. But they're often, our conflicts are often really unconscious. And so sometimes it does take, other consultants or friends who know GNM or someone else to come in and be like, hey, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about this? Or what about this? And definitely I encourage, whenever anyone's dealing with a symptom, I really encourage them to like DIY detective, keep a little detective journal, and literally without your perspective on it necessarily, but just write down the facts of what's happening in life around the times that the symptoms get better or worse or change or shift. Because sometimes what we think we're looking for is quite different to what we are actually looking for. And so if you can just factually document everything that's going on in life and then look back through it or give it to someone else to look at, and often someone else can be like, hey, did you notice there's like here is, the same pattern is happening? And it can be like, oh, wow, no, I didn't even realize, that was happening. So often these things are so unconscious is my point there. And so they can be tricky to resolve. And I find that the KCT program is one that's can be particularly difficult to resolve. And in the case of this, and actually I would say in the case of, we talk about like perceptual change versus physical change, right? As potential resolutions in GNM. And I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and perhaps some of the like the newer generation of GNM is not going to like me very much for saying this, but I do have, what I'm observing is that particularly with brainstem programs, it actually needs to be more of a practical physical change than a perceptual change. Like
I
the
agree.
psyche and the body really need to be convinced that this is put to bed, that we found the antidote, that the problem is over and the situation is resolved. And I'm not finding that perceptual change is often strong enough to facilitate that. I can downgrade it. I've seen it downgrade. But with the brainstem, like, you got to remember, like, think about the context of these programs. They are really, really primal, survival need-based programs. So it's like, can we really think ourselves out of needing more of something or our survival? And would it actually be wise to do so? Because if you think about, like, thinking yourself out of needing water or needing food or needing these primal resources, then there's actually potentially danger in that. Because we need these things. Like, this is the whole, this is what our biology is trying to get us what we need, right? And maybe it's not so relevant now in modern day as it was back in, caveman days, when we actually needed the water morsel or the protein morsel or whatever it is. And now those things are more sort of, emotionally based. The perception is different. But yeah, I think we have to be really careful with perceptual change around some of these programs. As much as I love, like, have a look at any of my work, I'm a massive, massive advocate for perceptual change, right? It is definitely our place of empowerment. And I do think it has a place, especially, like I said, now with modern day conflicts, it has a place because so much of our modern day conflicts are perceptually based as opposed to the actual thing that we needed back in caveman days. But yeah, I think we have to be also willing to get up and move and change things in a physical, practical way, especially with some of these brainstem, or especially with brainstem programs, is just what I'm observing as well. And in my case, I believe that this is going to be true for me, knowing what I've just come to know over the last few weeks about mine.
I think that that's a really great point that you just brought up, because this is also something that I've seen to be true over and over again, is that a perceptual resolution is not always enough. And it always is going to depend on what the underlying conflict shock is. And so this, like you said, with brainstem conflicts, I can see where this would be extra applicable. But even with other conflicts, like especially for children, right? Like if it was a separation conflict with the mother, going to daycare too early, there is no amount of perceptually resolving with that child that's going to replace the very practical resolution of that child being taken out of daycare to be with the mother again. Like you can't.
Correct.
What was a GNM doctor that I recently studied under? He said that we're living in a very unbiological world, and we are meant to have biological resolutions, but there's only a certain extent to which your body can adapt and actually have a biological resolution that you'd be able to survive anyways, if you just continue living in the same way without changing everything. It's like, oh, I'm just going to change the way I think. But that also involves, taking some actual steps to, like in this case with KCT, building community, right? I don't think it would be possible, depending on the underlying conflict shock, of course, to resolve the KCT if you're, living out in the woods by yourself, right? Like, I think that there is an element to which you have to look at the content of the conflict shock for you as an individual. What was the situation? And then you have to go from there to find your resolution. And sometimes it will be mostly practical and maybe a little perceptual. Maybe other times you'll realize that a perceptual resolution is available to you depending on what that underlying conflict was. And so this is why it's so unique for every individual. There's not, people ask us all the time, like, well, how do I resolve this? And which we'll get to in a minute. We'll discuss some, resolution, practical and perceptual resolution ideas and how we'd approach that. But on average, there's no one size fits all answer or approach to not just this conflict, but resolving any conflict through the lens of GNM.
And even if we use I actually love the example of separation. This is one that I've used before as well. But if we use that as an example, to bring about a perceptual change for either the mother or the child that it's okay to be away from each other. If you think about that in natural biological context, again, that would actually be dangerous. Like you would probably kill the child.
That means death, right?
Right?
Yeah.
It means death. Yeah. So freedom from fear, not promoting fear here, but like we need to be aware of like when it is appropriate to use perceptual change and not. And like, for example, one where I see perceptual change works quite well, and I won't go off too much on a tangent here, I promise. But so when we're talking about musculoskeletal issues and self-devaluations, this is one where I do seem to find that perceptual change can work quite well. But yeah, that's just in my observations. But yeah, I think it's really important to think about this and consider when we're working on ourselves, or if we're taking this into our work as professionals as well, like when is it actually appropriate to facilitate perceptual change, and when do we actually need to encourage these people? And what I see now is that even though I love perceptual change, sometimes it can almost become a bit of a cop-out because people don't want to make the required changes. It's like they don't want to move. They don't want to change their relationship, or they don't want to change their job. So it's like, oh, can I just sidestep this? And so we need to be really integral with our work there and be like, well, actually, no, like to resolve this, you might have to move
This
in
is
one way or another.
Such an important point. Yes, I completely agree. I see that with clients that I've had where there has been a practical resolution available to them that, I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. This is a practical resolution for this. They're the ones that have the fastest resolutions, right? And I do think like what you said with, chronic pain and with certain programs, and there are certainly others that, that they do have success with resolving perceptually, even if it takes a little longer, because you're changing, who would I have to be to no longer have this conflict as, applicable, right? But for the ones that, depending on the underlying conflict shock situation, especially when we're looking at this from a very primal survival-based perspective, sometimes changes need to be made. But you're so right. Like people, they don't want to leave the toxic partner. They don't want to make that change and pull their kid out of school and, rearrange their life or quit their job or, or whatever it is. It's hard because we're in a society where we're living very unbiologically. That can be really difficult.
Yeah. And for the most part, living like quite privileged lives as well, like we don't have to go and source the food and do all the things, and we have all this time and freedom. And to some extent we're I mean, it's a big generalization, right? And let's not go down this route, but it's quite a privileged time to be living in that context. So we're like, oh, I don't want to change my life. Whereas back in the day, if there wasn't food available in the near area, like the tribe would move.
Because you had to.
Because you had to.
Yeah.
So bit of a tangent, but important, I think.
It's a good tangent.
Good tangent.
Yeah, and perhaps I'll share where that comes into play in my own experience do you want me to share that? Is that helpful? Yeah. Cool. So just recently, so I've looked at a lot of different possibilities for my KCT. I know through my CT scan that the DHS was around 20 years ago, which was a really, really interesting time in life for me. So I'm 40, so this was around my 20 years old, and I actually think it was just prior to that. The 20 is a rough gauge. So between when I was 17 to 19, I was in a really interesting relationship. He was 11 years older than me, and there was like a lot of quote unquote abuse in that relationship. I say this because I do have some different experience of it now, but I'm, for purposes of the conversation, abusive relationship. And there was like lots of different possibilities. So I did lose friendship circles then. I was very isolated. I did have all the resources taken away from me when we separated. He like kept everything. There was all these different possibilities. And I also then after him, I went into like a very different relationship that was really good. And then I went overseas. So there's like literally away from my hometown, and that relationship broke up. There were so many possibilities, and I've explored so many of them. But what was pointed out to me was that and I sort of like timelined this, and got really clear on when I'd put on weight, when I'd lost weight, and not changed anything in the lifestyle or the diet or anything, right? Like there's been periods where I've been in the gym 5 days a week and we have a really generally good diet and lifestyle anyway, and like nothing has changed, and that's been extremely frustrating. So I just want to say that as well, because I really, really see you to the people that, and if there's even some of this in the questioning, right? Like I'm doing everything. I have a great lifestyle. I go to the gym. I'm active. Nothing budges. I get it. I really deeply get it. And I know how frustrating that can be. So anyway, back, what was pointed out to me when I shared this timeline was that so many of these points in life involved my mum and had to do with my mum. And I have put on, I've put on like 15 kilos since the birth of my son 3 years ago without diet and lifestyle changes. 15 kilos in 3 years. And like 5 to 10 of that, I'm just trying to make sure this is right. So yeah, 5 to 10 of that has been in about the last 6 to 8 months, has been like really exaggerated for me. I can see it in my face and all these bits. So trying to work out, you know, what is it? And I had thought, I had originally felt, and this is why I think it's important, and that I say so many times, this is unconscious, right? Because I had felt that this had a lot to do with my friendship group and my friendship circle. Mothering in these times is extremely hard when it comes to community. We are so often isolated, and maybe this is a part of it, but I now don't think it's the full picture. And I also experienced the breakdown of a friendship about 8 months ago. So I was like, was that it? Like, because I did feel like I got kicked out of the tribe with that. And I was like, was that it? But nothing just seems to be shifting. And even though I've come to actually a personal resolution around the friendship breakdown, I feel neutralized about that now. But again, nothing changed. I didn't start peeing after that resolution. Like, what is it? What is it? And then I went back. And so, yeah, so this has been coming on quite strongly. I fell pregnant with him in 2020. 2020, 2021 were obviously very interesting years and times for the whole planet. Right?
Especially Australia, though.
Sorry?
Especially Australia.
Oh my gosh. It was hectic. Like, yeah, our mandates and lockdowns and border closures here were hectic. And I do think that this is, you know, I hear so many people who say, I put on so much weight during, I'm going to call it the global theater.
Global theater. Yeah.
Right?
My favorite term.
And so, yeah, a lot of people put on weight during that time. And a lot of people put it down to like, oh, I couldn't leave the house as much, or I couldn't get to the gym, or I couldn't do this. Or no, what were you? You were isolated. You were like shut in. Your existence was in question. Your resources were in question, like particularly here in Australia. Anyway, tangent. So I was pregnant during all of that, and then I had my baby. And my mom couldn't get over here. She's in South Australia, and I'm in Western Australia. And the additional part to this is that my mum has early onset and quite advanced dementia, multiple separation conflicts. And she is in a really big stage of decline at the moment. I knew that when the borders closed, if she didn't make her way over here, I knew that it was probably going to decline quite quickly for her, which it has through that. And then even when the borders were open, then she had declined to the point where she couldn't drive anymore and her license was taken away and all of these things. So what I realized, what this person helped me realize was that, yeah, I think this actually has to do with my mum. And unfortunately, that's not going to change. Like I can't determine when that changes, right? Like my mum is on a very steady decline. She's now in full-time care. And with that is coming more and more medication, and that decline is going to continue to the point of death. What was shared was that at the point of her passing, that may be the point at which my psyche releases this. Because, and this is all tied in to abandonment / the fear of abandonment, which the fear of, by the way, can still instigate the program.
Yeah.
So yeah, there were lots of different things that I explored in relation to this time. there was also this moment where I remember it really clearly. I was trying to explain to mum what was going on within the relationship, as in there was, a lot of different forms of abuse going on. And she said to me, and I want to actually preface this by saying I don't hold this against my mum. I love my mum deeply and dearly. And this is actually a really difficult time for us because we are slowly but surely losing her. It's not something I'd wish on anyone, actually. And she said, I was trying to explain to her what was going on. And she said, yeah, well, you got yourself into this and I'm sure you can get yourself out of it. And in that moment, I was just like, whoa, I am like on my own in this. Like, there's no one to help me out of this. And I experience it differently now as an adult. I realize she perhaps didn't have the resources to deal with that information, or she didn't know what to do with it, or, there's a million things. I don't hold it against her. The age old, like, she was doing the best with what she had at the time. And also possibly I didn't communicate it properly. Like, possibly I didn't communicate it clearly enough. Right. But yeah, there were elements of abandonment and a soul without a mother, and there's no one here to catch me if I fall within that. And then I want to go a step back from that as well. I also think, even though this shows as the point of initiation on my CT, I do also think that there is, and this isn't, I will say that this is not necessarily traditionally like documented in traditional GNM. This is, again, my observations. I like to put that on it when it's not pure GNM.
Yeah, sure.
So what I observe is that I often find that there is something before let's call it the catalyzing event. So it's like there's programming and setup for these things in childhood before they actually register as a DHS on the brain. And so what I know about my childhood is that I also felt this sense of abandonment, existence, threat to my survival, soul without a mother, no one to catch me if I fall, right back in childhood. And I think a lot of these programs were either set up for or actually strike as a DHS in childhood. And I would say particularly up to the age of 7, there's like a real, and Steiner has some really interesting stuff around this as well. Like what happens in our first 7 years is so much of what we carry through life. And so I know that between the ages of 4 and 6, a lot happened for me in this context as well. My sister was born. My mum had a stillbirth baby. So I witnessed, loss and existence stuff there. I was afraid of losing my mum as well, which is not so much abandonment. This is actually going into loss conflict, which I have an ovary affected as well. But the other one that really, hey, darling, the other one that really strikes me, and I still remember this like viscerally in my body, is mum and I were on our own till I was about 2, at which point we moved in with my the man who became my dad, my stepdad, and I call him dad because he raised me. So at that point, it was just she and I up until 2, and then we moved in with dad as boarders actually originally, and then mum ended up marrying him and he became my stepdad. And then time went on, and around this age, mum started doing woodworking classes at night. And she would go once a week to these classes. And I remember this feeling of absolute panic when she would go because she was all I had. She was my only survival. Like, even though we were with dad now, as far as my biology knew, mum was all I had, right? And I can still feel that sense of panic, like, don't go, mum, don't, like, how could you leave me? Don't go. And to the point where I would actually hide in the back of her car, hoping that they wouldn't notice and that she would take me to these classes. And around the same age, I started having these reoccurring dreams, and dreams tell us a lot, right? Guys, pay attention to your dreams. They tell us a lot. And I would have these dreams. Do you guys know the nursery rhyme, Wee Willie Winky? Do you have that? Okay, so there's this nursery rhyme. It goes, Wee Willie Winky runs through the town, upstairs and downstairs in his nightgown.
Oh, I know.
Pulling through the windows, tapping on the locks, or calling through the locks, something like that. There's everybody in their bed. It's past 8 o'clock. And my mum would tell this to me thinking it was a nice nursery rhyme, but I would have nightmares based on this nursery rhyme about being in bed and trying to pretend to be asleep because I realized it was nearing 8 o'clock. And if I wasn't asleep, Wee Willie Winky was going to take me away. And I would have, awful, right? And I would have these reoccurring nightmares that if I wasn't asleep before 8 o'clock, or if I was pretending, but he knew I was pretending and he caught me out, he would come and literally drag me out of bed and drag me up the driveway and take me away. And my mum would be there in the driveway like, I'm so sorry, but it's for your own good. Yeah, like I can't stop it. And this was like, I believe in my dreams, I was playing out this abandonment and this survival program again and again and again. Like, Mum, don't leave me. Don't let me go. Don't. And this is what I think was like the programming and the setup for this DHS. Then later on in life came this real shock moment.
Yeah.
So I know that's a bit of a like long story, but I hope there's a context in there to why I'm sharing this is, it's not, these programs are not always easy to find, and they're not always what and where we think they are. And yes, it can be to do with the tribe, but it can also be like, really look at your survival, where your survival has been challenged is really where to look with this. Like I said in the very beginning, I think this is the utmost survival program we have. So really look at where your existence, your survival has been challenged. And actually one thread of this that we haven't spoken on yet that can come into this as well is the existence. So often this comes on when our existence is under threat. So if we receive something like a diagnosis or we go into hospital, suddenly that's actually a tangent we haven't touched on yet, but that is part of the possibility of these conflict themes as well.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but I just want to comment on your story. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that this is a really fantastic example for people to understand the onion layers that need to be peeled back. And, you've spent so long, working this conflict, navigating this. I mean, you yourself are a GNM expert that you've been studying this and implementing this and coaching from this perspective for years, right? And you even said earlier, you've worked with and are still working with and investing in your own coaches and own, GNM consultants, right? And this is the beautiful thing that I want people to really understand here. This is not like, you can learn GNM for yourself, and that is fantastic. But having the perspective of, a friend that knows GNM really well, or not just one GNM consultant or coach, but like multiple, right? Because everyone's going to have a unique perspective, or maybe pick up on something, when you're, working with the client to like create a timeline and, you're playing detective, right? And, finding the conflict and helping, ask them the right questions and, working the conflict, and all of that. Everyone's going to pick up on something different or pull out a different thread, pull on threads, pick out a different nuance, ask a question that can make you see something in a way that you hadn't before. And just, even how you initially, which I think it's never what we, always first think it is necessarily, like how, you're thinking, okay, it's about, maybe just kind of community or friends or whatever. And for some people, it might very well be that. But for you, you're looking back through your life and it's now you're, following this thread of, okay, I think this is about my mother and feeling abandoned, with her in that relationship. And then you're digging back into childhood. And I guess I always explain it this way. You have to look at, like, just what you said, not just the moment of conflict shock, but what was priming your perception
Yep.
to experience that conflict event as the specific type of conflict, right? And so like I always say, yeah, what was priming your perception? And I know Ashlee, one of our previous guests in a recent episode, Natasha Nazarali, she brought up something that's not GNM, it's actually from Family Constellations.
Oh, yeah.
And do you want to share that if you?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know where you're going with that.
Yeah.
We've talked enough.
Yeah.
So she asked us on this episode, what's the first conflict? And we both got it wrong. But it's this concept of when your mother found out you were pregnant, in that moment, was it, yay, I'm excited, or, oh no? Like, were you wanted or were you not wanted? And how does that even set you up for, as Abigail was saying, priming your perception, or like a precursor to an actual DHS moment, or that could be one as well. I mean, I know for me personally, I haven't had my CT scan read yet, but it will be happening at some point. But I think for me, it was in childhood, or even like my mom had a kidney infection when she was pregnant with me. So this conflict for me or another person listening could have been in utero, or it could have not happened until later. But either way, if it was the actual DHS or if it was priming me for a future DHS, it's still like setting me up for these types of conflicts because of, right, how your mother would interpret being excited when she's pregnant or not. And it's like, is it this oh no moment, or this, oh, I'm so excited, or what is it, a planned pregnancy or not? And again, not to like blame our mothers, and I feel like that you went over this really well, Nellie, but and then I think for the future, and I'm sure how you are mothering your children, Nellie, like you're doing it differently than how it was done for you. And so I think that's,
and I'm sure I'll still muck it up as well in different
yeah,
ways.
I mean, yeah, we're all human, we're all figuring it out, but I think the beauty of our conflicts, and this is the fifth biological law, the quintessence, it's like, how are we using our symptoms and these messages that come along with it to grow and evolve as an individual, and then hopefully as a society, and then do something different, right? Take different actions, have different perspectives, mothering your children differently so that we're not continuing on these same conflicts, and really setting our children up for success. And to, yes, doesn't mean that anyone's going to be a perfect parent, but making sure that they know that they're wanted, that they're loved, that you're going to be there to, catch them if they fall, practically and, emotionally or perceptually, because that's huge. And I didn't really have that either. So,
yeah, that's beautiful, Ash. And yeah, so it was a similar, what you're saying there makes sense to me, because I know that yeah, my conception was not planned. And although I know that my mom definitely wanted me, like I was not such a welcome surprise for my biological father, although we're fine now as well, right? But I have for a long time carried the story that I wasn't meant to be here at all, which I've just dissolved recently as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, mine was a troublesome conception, just like you're saying. So like even back then, was this set up as, where were my conflicts potentially set up back all the way then? And it makes so much sense to me that the weight is coming on quite quickly at the moment, because mum is declining quite quickly. So it's that deep inner sense of like, mum, don't leave me. Which will, potentially be released when she actually passes. And yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, Ash.
This is just really, really close to home. My mom is physically fine, but I've been trying to write this whole episode.
Yeah, and this was mentioned to me in part of this call the other day, right? That the mother-daughter relationship is pretty much the most fragile relationship in nature, in biology, and it's such a big one for so many of us. It's really, really tough. Like there's so much around mother-daughter stuff, and I can see it playing out with my daughter now too. And like you said, in the, there's lots of things I'm trying to change at the moment so that things are different. But yeah, the mother-daughter relationship is a huge one. And if, it might be worth exploring for women who are struggling to find the root of their KCT. Has the mother-daughter relationship been looked at?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it makes sense. And unfortunately, I don't have a great relationship with my family, my two sisters in particular. And so additionally, there's that sense of like, I am on my own. And once mum goes, like the further and the closer she gets to leaving, it's like, Mum, you can't leave me. Like you're the only one on my team kind of feeling. So it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out over the next few years. But what I'm having to come to peace with as well is that, yeah, my weight might not shift anytime soon because I'm not sure how I could perceptually get around this one. And even if I did, it might not be enough. And it might have to wait until my psyche releases it at the point of passing, or if something shifts in life. Because it's at this point, like bringing my mum back is out of my control, right? And so this plays into then, I feel like I'll just share this because I feel like it might be valuable for, and just really witnessing and holding you there, Ash, as well in this. For so long, I've looked at, like, even though I've known the KCT program well, there still is like that come and go of doubt of like, am I eating something that's wrong for me? Like, am I eating too much? Am I not doing enough exercise? Like, there's still that element of self-doubt that's played in and out of this so much over the last however many years. And I've explored so many different things, and I've paid for so many different like programs and classes and like weight loss programs and all these different things. It's been such a journey. The point of peace I've come to recently is like, yeah, coming to terms, and I'm not saying that this is easy every day, but coming to terms with the fact that this might not change for me anytime soon, and really shifting what I do in terms of diet and lifestyle. It's had to shift for me from this is about weight loss to this is about nurturing and nourishing my body, and maintaining my vitality. And I literally said this, like my daughter and I are training with a personal trainer at the moment together. And I said to him, like, ultimately at the core of this, yeah, it's a weight loss thing for me. Like that's my goal. But also I know that it's probably not going to change. Like through my knowledge, I know it's probably not going to change just as it hasn't in the past. And so we're going to have other benchmarks. We're going to have to be working towards other things. So like I need to keep track of, my weights and like actual weights, not my body weight, but my training weights, and my capacity in other ways is going to have to be moving for me to feel satisfied in results, because it's quite likely that my weight is not going to shift. And same with eating, it's really got to be about not will this affect my weight, and not second guessing that, but just about vitality and nutrition. And so I feel like that could be valuable for people as well, because I just know and acknowledge that point of like absolute sheer frustration of like, I've tried everything and I'm like really active person and I eat really well, and why is it still happening? And that come and go, even when you know the KCT conflict, that come and go of like, am I or aren't I? Am I or aren't I? Having the CT done for me was a really good point of like clarification in that of like, okay, it is not to do with lifestyle, but that doesn't mean that the lifestyle has to fall behind, like by the wayside. So the lifestyle's got to be about, like I said, strength, vitality, sustenance, nutrition, feeling nourished. They're two separate things.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully that's valuable for some people as well.
No, it definitely is.
I love that. I think too, the big thing that I hear coming through is just this component of radical acceptance, which this is not just for KCT, guys. This is for any symptom you're dealing with that goes back to any conflict that you're dealing with. There's this point you have to get to where, you know, you have to come to accept, okay, like, and Ashlee, I know that you shared this in our last, in one of our episodes that we did on
The acne
acne,
podcast.
right?
Yep.
The acne did not, nothing changed. Like the acne did not resolve for you until you got to this point of being totally okay with like, you know what, maybe this is just my body's way of trying to protect me. This is my biologically sensical adaptation. You know, I understand the purpose, and maybe that's okay if it stays, you know, and I'm okay with that. Right.
It's
I
like
think that's
surrender.
huge.
Yeah.
Which is
that point of complete surrender and complete acceptance. And I do see that in my own things that I've resolved and clients that I've worked with as well. There does have to be that level of stopping, pushing and trying and like this forcing.
Yes. Yeah.
Know that, to a point, yes, energy and effort, but then also that break point of like, okay, where am I forcing this now, and where is this actually becoming more of an issue for me to keep diving into this than just to surrender, accept, and let biology and nature play out in its own time and divine timing and order and quintessence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had a client recently that she came to me and she was, you know, like kind of marching me through the list of not demands, but kind of like, okay, well, I want to get rid of this and I need to get rid of this symptom. And it was definitely the relationship with that symptom of I need to get rid of it. This is urgent. Like I'm kind of seeing you as a last resort and I expect results from you, you know, and I was like, okay, whoa. And then she was telling me like, towards the end of the session, I want you to create a checklist of things for me to do every day, for me to resolve this. And I see, you know, you're both smiling and you know just about how well that's going to work.
Yeah, it's also a very, very masculine, like it's a very masculine energy, right? And there's some really interesting stuff in GNM about the biology of the sexes, and feminine and masculine is like very heightened at the moment. So even I think there's tie-in there too. If you're biologically female, then coming at this from like a checklist point of view, and that maybe it's not going to work so well for a female. Maybe the female really, you know, for a male, maybe the male needs the checklist of the to-do points, but maybe the female is a bit more of that surrender and acceptance. I don't know, just a thought.
Right. And also though, like there is nothing really tangible to do that can just be checked off. I mean, sure, I could give you, you know, some meditation, some breath work exercises, some, you know, take a salt bath, you know, whatever. Sure, there can be recommendations on there, but ultimately that's not going to resolve, you know, the conflict. So anyway, but I totally resonated with that because I used to be exactly that person. So like I got it.
What do I need to do? What are my daily morning rituals that take me all day, right? So many memes about that.
So
something actually just came into my mind then is like, for those who are struggling with where their weight is at and experiencing that frustration, which I know all too well, something that has helped soften that for me in the interim, you know, like acknowledging that this might not change for me anytime soon, is to then look at how is your current body weight serving you? And this is a bit of DeMartini stuff, which I don't know, like I love as well. So this is looking at like all the different areas of life. So spiritual, financial, career, relationships. How is your current body weight actually serving you in those areas and in those ways? And exploring that was definitely something that helped soften the frustration towards my current body weight and body state.
Yeah, I love that.
So I think something else we want to get into, which is a huge topic in the GNM world, and this is why we always say that the KCT is the most important program in like all of GNM, is the syndrome. And for those who, have maybe scrolled around on learninggnm.com or through any GNM, literature out there, and you've come across the words in all caps, the syndrome, what the heck is that, right? And so if you want to describe what we mean by that and how the KCT program running an active KCT conflict can essentially worsen any program that you have in the healing phase.
Yeah, so it impacts the brain and the body primarily. So because there is so much, there can be so much water retention with the kidney collecting tubules active, then it becomes what we call the syndrome. So any other program that you have running, particularly when it goes into healing, into PCL, which is where we know that most programs show their symptoms. This is where we usually get the symptoms. This is where we get pain, swelling, inflammation. And if you can imagine the PCL phase is a lot like after the gym workout. It's the reparation phase. So we're either repairing cells that have been degraded in conflict activity, or we're degrading cells that have been proliferated and added in conflict activity, or there's a change in a return of a function, which is only for a few programs. And so in that, like after the workout phase, this is like swelling, inflammation. And if we've got exacerbated fluid and exaggerated fluid in the body, it's like all the fluid goes to that site and effectively can make things a lot more uncomfortable. And in some cases, dangerous as well. There are some things that we need to consider here when somebody has, there are some safety elements we need to consider when someone's got a really exaggerated deep KCT active and they go into healing phases of some programs can be, really dangerous, just to put it plainly. And so we want to know if that's the case for people. We want to be really careful actually what programs we even work on if someone has a deeply active KCT, because the fluid can really complicate things. It can make things really uncomfortable, and it can really complicate things because of the fluid. So imagine if you're in a lung program that goes into healing and you've got really deep KCT active and a lot of fluid retention, and then all the fluid goes to the lungs, and then we have complications, or the heart, or wherever the program is that's going into healing. So definitely some complications that can occur there we need to be really mindful of. And then in the brain as well, same thing kind of happens on the brain. So the site that's active with the DHS that accumulates fluid in the healing phase too. There's reparation of glial cells, and we call it an edema. So again, if you imagine like someone's got a lot of fluid and that all comes to the same site in the brain, then we can have swelling. That can obviously be, impactful as well. And this is where headaches can be pretty gnarly. If we've got more swelling around certain sites, headaches can be pretty bad. So it's, just something to be really mindful of when we're working on ourselves and working with others, that often it's more valuable to work on resolving a KCT first and expelling some of that fluid before we work on any larger or more serious programs. So that's kind of the syndrome. Is that enough for?
Yeah,
I definitely, if you want to
touch an Abigail question,
just to give people an example of this in a very recent event with the, let's say, global theater over the past several years that started in 2020. Why was it that the thing, the global theater, why was it more serious than just, the average annual flu? Why did we see so many more deaths, right? Like if you could kind of connect the syndrome in the KCT to what we saw there.
Yeah. So that is a huge question that is not going to be just with this answer. Like that's a whole nother podcast. But in the context of KCT, The reason why we might see more deaths during that time frame is if you think about like, yeah, how isolated did people feel during that time? Lockdowns, mandates, state closures, border closures. Definitely, huge fear of it, like existence, threat on the existence and threat on resources. So it makes complete sense to me that a lot of people would have been running KCT, either worsened KCT that was already running or potentially activated new conflicts as well. And so then when we've got any other symptom, like I just said, any other symptom, which would have been rife during that time for many reasons, one of them being the fear that was, very well, what would I say? It was activated. I believe intentionally activated during that time for, through media and all sorts of things. But so we've got lots of different symptoms at that point in time, and we've got lots of KCT, lots of fluid retention, and it's just basically going to make everything worse. So if we've got lung programs running, heart programs running, during that time, yeah, there's definitely KCT could have played into the increase of death rates and symptoms and severity during that time for sure. Like I said, I think there's many other tangents to this conversation. It's a big conversation,
for
right?
sure.
We're not going to do that right now, but yeah, definitely we can see how that could have impacted for sure.
I guess we should later on do a whole episode on that and really unpack that for people. But yeah, even just if you want to touch on the hospitalization aspect of, if someone goes into the hospital or whatever, gets checked out, and then it's like, oh, you have this serious, scary thing, we need to put you in the hospital. Boom, I mean, that can be an existence conflict where, like you said, it can, be activating one that's already there. And so then you have right, the situation where, and you see why, people who go in nursing homes or in hospitals, why they deteriorate, right? And so just as an example for someone, if you can keep this in your mind, like bronchitis plus the adaptation that would lead to bronchitis, right? That, lung adaptation plus KCT would result in like pneumonia, for example. So, it has the ability to worsen pretty much anything. And this is not to scare people or to say that, I mean, at least speaking for myself, I'm certainly not anti-medical intervention. And, as Nellie said, sometimes you will need to have, some life-saving interventions or, even just to help make yourself more comfortable, because there are, our bodies can only, I think it was Dr. Melissa Sell that said, you can only swim so far out from shore before you can't swim back anymore, right? And this is not to discourage anyone or anything like that, but just to give you an idea of why it's so important to resolve the KCT first.
As a priority. Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So Ashlee, anything else you want to add about the syndrome?
I think we covered everything. Yeah, I think in my own personal work, sometimes people are more focused on other symptoms, but they also have this one, but it may be a little less obvious to them than their other symptoms, which, like something like a morsel conflict where they're having diarrhea all the time. And so my approach tends to be what's impacting them the most. And then literally, yeah, like every client that I've ever worked with also has KCT. If that's not the main one they're focusing on, it's usually a close second. So yeah, just working to downgrade them before then trying to resolve something more fully, which I know I said earlier, because it's just going to make it more intense and more painful, and nobody wants that.
It doesn't necessarily, like, it doesn't need to be the priority in every case. Like in my case, I know that I'm running it, but I've still worked on other programs and I've still had other resolutions that weren't too bad. But I'm talking about, like, I've also had clients who are in extreme state of active KCT, and they've got, other programs running, lung programs, heart programs. And in that case, I wouldn't touch the other programs. And in fact, I had to keep we had to keep rerouting this client again and again and again. Don't go near it. Don't go near it. I don't want to know about that right now. Like, it's actually not safe for us to work on that right now. We need to focus on getting your existence conflict downgraded first. We need to get you urinating first, basically. When you start peeing, then we'll talk about the other things.
Yeah. It depends on the client and what they have going on. And it's really like a case by case basis.
Definitely. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess before we jump into the Q&A, because I know we do have Q&A questions on this topic about the topic of weight gain, I wanted to throw out there that Ashlee and I will be doing a whole separate episode on all the different programs that can play a role in difficulty losing weight, because KCT is certainly not the only program that can lead to unwanted weight gain. Okay. So also when we're talking about difficulty losing weight, that's due to an underlying conflict. And Nellie briefly touched on this, but say if you have two people and they're both kind of the same basic height and build and eating a very similar diet and doing a similar amount of exercise, if one is having a lot of difficulty losing weight, there's likely an underlying conflict that's the reason why. Or like what Nellie shared, that she was amping up exercise and changing her diet, and it was like still the weight gain was like persistent, and nothing seemed to like move the needle. So when you're in that situation, when you're eating a pretty, standard healthy diet, an adequate amount of calories for your, body type, whatever, and you're, getting a decent amount of movement in, when that's, still not moving the needle at all, then that's when we want to look at, okay, some underlying, conflicts. We're not saying that you can just eat literally as much as you want or like never move your body and that it's due to a conflict that you're not losing weight, right? So first of all, that's a little caveat there. But then when we look at the different programs that can lead to this difficulty losing weight, by far the most common that we see is KCT. And that's, the focus of this episode today. But there are some other programs that can also lead to difficulty losing weight, which again, we'll cover in a separate episode. So just wanted to throw that out there. But I guess we can dive in. Ashlee, anything else to add?
Was there any other resolution things we wanted to talk about? I feel like, this would be a good thing. So getting your water intake has become very popular, with those water apps, like a timer that's like, okay, now it's time to drink your water, right? Or those huge water jugs with like lines on them, like encouraging you to like force yourself to drink water.
Dude, I see people carrying around like gallons.
Yeah.
Like at the gym.
This is not medical advice, but like, don't do that. It's not necessary for your health. And actually, especially then if you have an active KCT conflict, you don't want to make things worse by then intaking, especially a lot of plain water that you can't really do anything with. So drink when you're thirsty and pay attention to that. And noticing like your urine output, like you don't necessarily have to measure it, which you could. That can be fun. I used to be a nurse and worked in the hospital, so like I don't know if I'd ever measure my own urine because I'm like, memories, hospital memories. But be paying attention to like what is your relationship with, quote, drinking enough water, because usually that's not going to be helpful, because it can then just put more increased kind of like load on the kidney collecting tubules, because then there's more water to kind of filter through, and it's water that you don't actually need. So yeah, anything else you guys want to add to that? Because it's such a craze right now. It's crazy.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot actually. So yes, definitely we don't want to be over consuming water if we've got active KCT. However, if we go the other way and under consume, then the tendency of the body is to continue
hold on to water. Yeah.
Hold on, right? So there is a balance there and I don't know exactly where that balance, I would say it's probably going to be different for every person, but it's like you definitely don't want to starve yourself of water that's going to make the body's natural processes store more, and you don't want to overconsume water, particularly like if I've got someone who's got both kidneys active and they're really storing water, then it's like, okay, let's keep it to the basic, like bare minimum at this point in time. We definitely don't want to go down the route of intravenous, like drips and stuff in hospital can be really problematic because they're bringing more water into the system. Again, not medical advice. But the thing that I think is really interesting about this is like, because I always go like back to the day, right? Back in caveman days, back in primal days. I'm like, how would we have been consuming 3-4 liters of water a day back then?
We wouldn't even have access to that.
I just don't think it would be happening, particularly when I look at the Indigenous Australian tribes, the Indigenous Aboriginals, the First Nations people of Australia. Like, like they would have, lived by water sources, but I just can't see anyone drinking the amount of water that we do today. And so, yeah, I've thought about, I don't necessarily have an answer for it, but I think it's curious that there is this huge push on water now. And I just don't think it actually would be a natural thing for us. I definitely, like for me, I add bicarb soda and a little pinch of Celtic sea salt into my water. I sort of alternate between that, and I've got some really cool little electrolytes now at the moment as well. And I would recommend that for anyone who does have KCT running, the bicarb and the electrolytes and stuff like that. Actually for anyone, because the like tap water as it is not like, it's not that usable. Like you said, Ash, it's not that usable for our body. It's not, because it's not the water we're after so much as the mineral content within the water is a big part of why the body wants water. And that idea of us coming from the sea as well. So
yeah, the sea is not tap water, if anyone didn't know.
Not tap. Yeah. Right. Yeah, but it's a really interesting point, I think. Anyway, just wanted to add that.
I'm guessing that the Aboriginals, that their water sources were probably higher in mineral content also.
Definitely.
Right. And so they maybe needed less. And anyway, I won't get into that, but I can't picture them carrying around their gallon of water, like gotta stay hydrated.
I literally actually had this, right? There's this local elder, Nan Viv, an Indigenous elder that, born and bred here in the area, caretaker of the land. And I picked her up. She doesn't have a car, so she often just like walks and then people pick her up. And I picked her up one day and she said, she'd obviously walked quite a way already. And she said, "Do you happen to have any water?" And I was like, yeah, go for it. And I had 2 bottles on the floor in the passenger seat. And she literally said, she's like, these things, she's like, I don't know, we would never carry this. Like, we never used to carry this. She's like, this is a modern thing. And I was like, that's a really interesting point. Like, you guys probably would have walked quite some substantial distances. And I'm sure they would have known where water holes were and that kind of thing. But yeah, it wasn't a usual thing to carry the good old water bottle like right by our side all the time. Anyway, tangent.
Also, like, what happened to just, you're posing the question, well, what is the right amount of water to drink? And what about just drinking when you're thirsty? Like, what happened to just following your body's natural cues of thirst, right?
So many things about that. Yeah.
Okay, should we get into the Q&A?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Do you want to ask? We're going to try to do this as rapid fire style as we can, but Nellie, if we get to a question and you realize that maybe we didn't touch on this as much already, then you can go a little, deeper into it. But yeah, Ashlee, take it away.
So first question, how does the KCT relate to people who end up having neurological dysfunctions?
Yeah, so this goes into the realm of constellations. So when we're looking at the constellation of the kidneys and the brainstem, it effectively puts someone in a state of disorientation and confusion. And part of the purpose of this is that it's like walking around in circles, right? And not going too far from the home, not going too far from the tribe and from the place of where we want to be and where our safety is. So yeah, we're going into the realm of constellations there. Again, it's another like really big topic, but yeah, if we've got multiple KCTs running and both sides of the brain are impacted, then yeah, we're going into brainstem constellations there.
Awesome. Next one, how to stop retaining water and bloating by resolving this.
Yeah, well, as soon as you resolve it, you basically start peeing it out. Bloating can be like, yes, the KCT can have some bloating, but we can, there's lots of other programs that can lead to bloating as well. So it's not definitive just from, like, I would need to know a lot more about the person. Are we looking at morsel conflicts or gallbladder or, lots of different things there. But effectively, when you resolve it, you should pee it out.
Yeah, I've had that experience. So are there any other indications when you're in the healing or resolution besides lots of peeing in the night? Is there any other indications?
Yeah, so lots of peeing, not just in the night, but it'll be like pretty constant during the day as well. Like I've heard of people peeing out like 7 liters within,
Wow.
within a short space of resolving it, and all sorts of things. So like it can be pretty extreme. So peeing, we also get the night sweats, right? Because we're looking at brainstem endodome programs, as you've experienced. So anytime there's TB involvement, night sweats. The foamy urine, smelly urine, potentially kidney stones and a bit of pain from the inflammation and stuff there. They would be the biggest telltale signs.
And then the next, go for it.
Sorry, just also if they do have lab work that they're going off of, the urea and creatinine would normalize.
Yes, correct.
Well, it'd be increased during conflict active, and then go back to normal.
Phase. Yeah. And actually you do have to be sometimes a little bit careful of protein loss in the healing phase as well. Yep.
Well, and that's for other programs too. Like we want to have more protein in the healing phase.
Yeah, particularly with the KCT though, because we're peeing out all that urea, creatine, all the different things. Actually, there's a case with Dr. Hammer where like so much peeing out, so much urine that it actually became life-threatening, and Dr. Hammer picked it up in time and put this particular patient on like astronaut food to make sure she was getting and just was able to save them. So it can be a significant amount. You're going to want to take like minerals and vitamins and stuff if you're going through a big healing phase. You definitely going to want to be keeping up your vitamins, minerals, your salts content and stuff like that.
Next question, can you be running the KCT program without having weight gain?
Yep, sure can. So we spoke about, like, you can go either direction. So you can have the weight gain, but then we also have the individual who's quite slim and running the KCT. I think, Abigail, did you mention you're running KCT?
Well, yeah, based on my brain scan reading, I have KCT. But
lovely Abigail is a very slim individual from what I can see on my screen. And so, and this one often, not always definitive, but tends to be that more refugee and the resource one. So the body is storing the urea and creatine instead of so much the water.
Yeah. So how do you know if the KCT is responsible for weight gain or if it's something else?
Yep. So, I mean, the most definitive is the CT scan. But then even with a CT scan, you might be running other programs. So first of all, like very first point of call, diet and lifestyle, be honest with yourself. Are you moving enough? Are you eating well? Are you eating the right amounts? Then you can look at fluid intake, input, output. Like I mentioned, if you really want to have a fun Friday night, like I think we're recording this on your Friday night, girls. So like fun Friday night. Urine measurement, monitor for a few days. What's your intake? What's your output? See if and there will be a slight difference because we will sweat and breathe out and, like lose a little bit of fluids in other ways. But if there's a significant difference, then, chances are they would be the main two I'd start with. Yeah. So diet and lifestyle, CT scan, and fluid measurements.
Eyes and O's, guys. Take an output.
Yeah.
And then, so this person asked, wondering about calibrating the mind when isolation is one's actual daily reality.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on this. I mean, you can try working with perceptual change to downgrade the conflict, but potentially it might be that you actually need to change your situation.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I can see perceptual change downgrade things, but when it comes to the brainstem and KCT, yeah, it might just be that you actually need to move and change your reality, and just remember that you are in control of your reality. Like, we think that there's lots of things stopping us, but the reality of that is that we are in control of our reality. And although some decisions might not seem like ones we want to make, they are available to us, and it's our choice that determines whether we change it or not. So
Yeah,
harsh, but
so
true.
true.
Yeah.
Interesting question. So why do some people go through abandonment conflicts but don't gain weight?
Yep, cool. So we could be looking here at, like we've said, the different direction of this, where there's the urea and creatine storage instead of the water, but also we can feel abandoned and it might not be a DHS. Remember that we have to hit the 3 criteria of the DHS to constitute a DHS. So it's got to be isolating, it's got to be acute, and it's got to catch us off guard. If it doesn't meet those, if it's only 2 or any one of those, then we can have an emotional conflict. We can feel abandoned, but it might not necessarily set off the biological program. We've got to hit all 3 of those criteria in the moment for that to happen. So that is really down to how people perceive things as well. So so we might have one situation where a mother leaves a child. The child might not experience that as an abandonment. They might experience it as a separation, or they might experience it as a self-devaluation, or any number of other things, or they might not hit those 3 criteria of the DHS. So yeah, they might not gain weight. It's really up to the individual and their perception, their context, their life experiences, their prior filters, their prior programmings. There's so much that comes in here.
Yeah, definitely. So what are other symptoms besides weight gain? Then they asked about dark circles under the eyes. They also asked about cysts, but I don't think that would be under the
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on this one. So yeah, weight gain, baggy eyes, just general fluid retention, puffiness, cysts. I think maybe they might mean the like kidney stones, maybe, or also if there is extreme fluid retention, sometimes cysts can burst. That is one of the risks of the syndrome as well. Like, we've got a cyst that's got a lot of fluid within it because of the retention, they can burst. So not cysts themselves are not going to be created by this program, but yeah, they're the main symptoms. If it's coming and going, then again, those kidney stones, long term coming and going is we'd get the degradation of the kidney there, and the you might get cancer diagnosis or other things. That's long term. It's like really long term, and really big conflicts that are coming and going.
Yeah. And they didn't specify which type of cyst, but you have to look at, well, where's the cyst? Is it an ovarian cyst, or is it, you have to see, okay, where's the cyst located? What's the tissue layer, So, but like you said, the syndrome or the KCT and active KCT running concurrently can definitely cause the cyst to get really big, to burst, to have a lot more complications.
Yeah. It's like overfilling a water balloon. Like eventually it can only hold so much water and it's going to break. So, and then we already covered the next one, so I'll just move on to the next one after that. What if you've done everything you know to do to resolve the KCT and are still overweight? This person said they're not a diabetic and I eat good food and exercise regularly.
Yeah. So this is me, right? This is me. And this is what I kind of shared on earlier. Is like, I really do feel like I've explored so much of this. I'm 9 years deep into applying GNM, GHK to daily life and teaching it and working with it. And, I've worked with so many consultants on this. Sometimes it just is really unconscious. So I would say keep working, keep exploring with other people in a gentle way. Again, not in that necessarily really aggressive masculine way, but in that gentle inquiry, curiosity way. Keep exploring, keep getting different people's perspectives on it. Keep being real about movement and food. Like, don't let them, like I said, there is a tendency to be like, oh, I just won't worry about them now because it's just KCT. It's like, no, keep on top of those things for the nourishment, for the nutrition, for the vitality. Keep exploring and be prepared to understand that the KCT conflict is something that you hadn't thought of before, and be prepared to move, actually do something, change something with that, but also be prepared that it, like in my case, it might not resolve for a number of years yet. And so then it becomes that real case of surrender and acceptance. And as I mentioned, one of the things that I found really helpful there is to then explore, okay, how is this current symptom, or how is this current body state, how is this current body weight actually serving me in this moment in order with my highest values and priorities and goals in life? And there will be, like, I found things there as well. For example, like for some people, the fact that I have excess weight makes me more approachable and more like, they don't feel threatened by me, or I'm very relatable. There's all sorts of things that I've explored that my current weight, like my kids love my current weight because it's beautiful to cuddle and hug, and there's all these different benefits that keep exploring them, and they can help soften the sense of frustration or any fear around what's happening, while you continue to gently be curious about what might be behind this.
Yeah, I love that. Last one. Is kidney disease or dysfunction a KCT conflict? And can you always resolve or downgrade the KCT? Which I feel like you just kind of covered, but.
Yep. So first part to that question, kidney disease and dysfunction, we're looking at that really long-term hanging, healing conflict, relapsing conflict. So there's, rebuilding. So there's proliferation of tissue, and then degradation and proliferation and degradation and proliferation and degradation. And each time it degrades, it takes a little bit more tissue. So this is when we start to see like, that decline and degradation of the kidney. There's also the kidney parenchyma to look at as well. So not just the kidney collecting tubules. There's several different parts to the kidney. We've got the parenchyma, and then we've got the renal pelvis and the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex are all part of that little pocket of organs there. So there's different things to look at there as well. It's not necessarily always just the KCT. But yes, effectively, we're looking at hanging, healing, and relapsing conflicts. And I think I've already addressed, can you always resolve or downgrade a KCT? No, like theoretically, yes, but what are you willing to do that to get that? And in my case, like it's not going to be possible. It's not possible to bring my mum back right now. So I'm going to have to wait and see what changes when life changes in regards to that.
Yeah, definitely. And there's actually one more on there that I can go ahead and read it. Does drinking alcohol exacerbates? I read that wrong. Does drinking alcohol exacerbate symptoms? Is it the mindset around drinking?
I think this is a really big question. So alcohol is like, it's an agent. It can be a track. Alcohol can be a track as well. And there's something coming to mind, actually. There's a hormone, ADH, I think it's called. The ADH hormone. This was something I discovered the other night. I'm not going to go deep into this at the moment because I don't understand it properly yet, but there's a hormone called ADH, which is an antidiuretic hormone. And I picked up that something happens to that that can be impacted by ethanol, which is alcohol.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a tie in there.
Oh, alcohol blocks the ADH.
Alcohol blocks ADH.
Yeah, I just Googled it.
Yeah, and so because I was reading up on this, I can't remember the full thing of it right now, but ADH has something to
That's why you
do.
pee more when you drink.
Yeah, it has something to do with our urination. So I was just going down that rabbit hole the other night because I think there might be a correlation there, but I don't know enough about it to speak on it properly just at this point in time. But yeah, there's lots of different things with alcohol. They're the main ones that come to mind at the moment. It can be a track. It's a sympathetic agent. Is it sympathetic or parasympathetic?
I think it's
I think it's going to be,
parasympathetic.
yeah, I feel like it's different for different people. I mean, theoretically, it would slow us down, which is the parasympathetic, but I do know people who go into mania when they drink
Well,
alcohol. Well, and the sugar is going to be a sympathetic.
I think that maybe what you're referring to too is that when I know we're not going to dive into the topic of constellations, but even without being in a constellation, alcohol can put you in a simulated constellation. So if you have like one conflict shock, then alcohol on one side of the brain, then alcohol can like basically put you in that. The best way I can describe it is like a simulation of a constellation in which, depending on which side of the brain was emphasized, we'd have more depressive or manic behavior.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It basically changes the vibration of the brain,
Yeah.
which really like messes with conflicts that we've got active. It's a good way of putting it, actually. I like that explanation.
Yeah. And I find interesting too that whatever, constellations someone has going on, they're really like amplified and very obvious when they're drinking. And like you said, it could be a track, but also it does change that vibrational state of your brain. And this would require a whole deeper discussion in constellations, which we will be doing a whole like series on actually. But yeah, hopefully that's like a little taste of what's to come.
Yeah.
So one last question for you, Nellie, before we wrap up. For our listeners, is there one piece of advice or kind of one last thing you would say to someone that's in this conflict that that is frustrated, that has been struggling with it for a long time? Yeah, is there like one last thing that you would say to them?
I guess it's really kind of what I've shared already. It's like, yeah, so like I'm really having to come to, like personally, I'm really having to come to that place of surrender and acceptance right at the minute that this might not change. And I won't stop trying to explore it, but the reality is it might not shift or change for some time. And the thing that might change it is actually quite sad, like the passing of my mum is what might change it. So yeah, just surrendering to that while simultaneously continuing to be gently curious about if there is anything that I can shift in life or in my mind to soften it, to downgrade it, while also simultaneously softening the frustration by way of, what are the benefits of this body weight right now? How is it serving me? And how is this a divine part of my journey? And I do have this sense as well that by going through this personally myself, when it does come to a point of resolution, I'm really going to be really well equipped and resourced to assist other people.
Others.
Yeah, that are going through it, because I've I've firsthand experienced it in such detail and longevity that I understand, because I think that being understood in that level of frustration is really unique, and it's like one of my greatest challenges has been not being understood by the fitness world. Like, you're being trained by these really fit, slim body types, and you're like, you just don't get it. It's like, and being questioned in like, are you sure you're eating properly? And like, I know you're doing the movement properly because you're in here, but are you sure you're eating properly, and tracking that? And so, yeah, I just really want to acknowledge anyone who's going through this in that frustration. And the best way I've found of softening that frustration is, like I said, to explore how is this body type benefiting me and serving me right now. That's honestly, yeah, while simultaneously doing the things gently that, you know, are still working towards resolving it. I think that's my main my main takeaway is like, I get it. I really deeply get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you touched on how, this extra body weight is benefiting me, right? And leaning into that. But I think also, how is this adaptation, even on through your journey of diving deeper into this and continuing to peel back those layers of the onion, and I think that that's the greatest gift in our symptoms, is that it leads us to the conflicts in our life, and ultimately working on those conflicts and gaining awareness around that. That's only going to improve our life, right? Like you're saying, okay, right now, even if you're not losing that weight physically, you are still, benefiting from this process of, what was the phrase used? Like lowering the frustration, right? And like
Yeah.
lowering the, how much you're allowing it to negatively affect you, like mentally.
Right.
And so you're going deeper into this process of learning about yourself. I mean, and you've gone way back, into childhood and, where it started, right? And you've put so much, work into this, but ultimately, I'm sure you would say that it's enriched your, personal journey and, getting to that deeper layer of awareness. And I'm sure as a mother, making sure that, this is bringing so much awareness to how you're showing up for your children.
Yeah, 100%. Well, look, there was a perfect example here. Like my son burst in, he wanted me. My partner was like, no, come out. And then he was crying, and I could hear that and I could feel that heart tug. And I was like, I can't do it right now. So come on in and you can hang out with me while we chat, Like, it's
Yeah, and
definitely
just
the way that,
setting your kids up for, obviously, like we said earlier, like no parent is going to be perfect, but having this experience and going through it so deeply and going back to things in childhood, and then you said like in your 20s and stuff, and just, yeah, really setting your kids up for success and being there for them in a way that you didn't get.
Yeah. And I
So,
say this quite often, and this is like not, again, not traditional GNM. And I understand that I understand it this way because of my own constellations as well. Like my constellations mean that I have an interest in the spiritual realm and, like energetics and all this type of thing. But I truly do believe, like you both touched on this, that our physical symptoms and our physical biological programs have a huge tie-in to our evolutionary lessons in this life as a being, as a soul, as a spiritual experience. And I witness this so much in my clients as well, is that when we do the work to shift the physical programs, there is a huge evolution of the person, the individual, the soul. And I do believe that we've come into this lifetime with potentially these written into our contracts already. Like, these are the experiences you're going to have, and this is part of your job in this lifetime, is to unravel this experience. And if you don't do that without the symptom, then you're going to get the symptom to point you in that direction. And if you still ignore it, it's going to keep getting louder and things, right? So yeah, I do very much have that belief, and I see it time and time again that when we, the physical programs are, the point of them is evolution and adaptation, right? They're working for the physical evolution and adaptation of the individual, of the species as well, if you like. And I see alongside that the evolution of the individual, the soul, the spirit, the journey happens as well when we take that path. So yeah.
Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Nellie. This has just been a really great conversation. I know the topic was KCT, but man, I feel like we touched on some even more important topics of, like you sharing your journey and patience with the process, and showing people how even some of the, top GNM experts out there like yourself, you're still peeling back the layers, right? And working towards downgrading and resolution. And I often find too that, there are certain things that are perhaps not easier, but more are able to be resolved a bit more quickly. But I find that we all have this one big overarching theme, if you will, of, conflicts. Like, my tendency is more towards self-devaluation conflicts, or, we all have, or, for some people it's separation conflicts. And, like what you were saying, what has your perception since birth primed you? What types of conflicts are you primed to experience? And I find we often have this one big one that's rather stubborn that, we learn so much through that process. So anyway, before I get carried off with my mythomanic constellation, let's wrap it up there.
Thank you so much, Nellie. It was great to have you on.
Welcome. An absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, ladies.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. We appreciate you being here.
If you would like some additional support in navigating your health symptoms, we both provide coaching services from a German New Medicine perspective.
Our Instagram handles and personal websites are linked in the podcast description.